Maybe you're like me. I grew up in a church where the word doctrine was not a very positive word. Doctrines were things that people believed instead of believing in the Bible. So when I first began to learn that systematic theology focused on this doctrine and that doctrine, I recoiled. Why would any follower of Christ want to learn doctrines instead of the Bible? But in traditional systematic theology, doctrines are not substitutes for the Bible. Rather, they're simply ways to summarize what we sincerely believe the Bible teaches. And as such, sound doctrines have a very important place in Christian theology. This is the fourth lesson in our series, Building Systematic Theology. We've entitled this lesson, Doctrines and Systematics, because we'll look at the ways constructing a systematic theology involves the formation of doctrines or teachings on many different subjects. Our lesson will divide into three main parts. We'll begin with a general orientation toward doctrines and systematics. What are they? What place do they hold in systematic theology? Second, we'll explore the formation of doctrines. How do theologians create their doctrinal discussions? And third, we'll explore the values and dangers of doctrines in systematic theology. What advantages and disadvantages do they present to us? Let's begin with a general orientation to our subject. Our orientation toward doctrines and systematics will touch on four issues. First, we'll provide a definition of what we mean. Second, we'll focus on the legitimacy of creating doctrines. Third, we'll turn to the goals of doctrines and systematics. And fourth, we'll describe the place doctrines hold in systematic theology. Let's look first at what we mean by doctrines and systematics. We'll begin with a simple definition. The term doctrine is used in so many ways in theology that it's difficult to come up with a definition that will satisfy everyone. But for our purposes, a doctrine in systematic theology may be defined in this way. A doctrine is a synthesis and explanation of biblical teachings on a theological topic. This definition points to three major dimensions of what we will mean in this lesson when we speak of doctrines. First, doctrines concern theological topics. Second, they synthesize biblical teachings. And third, they explain biblical teachings. Let's unpack each dimension of our definition, beginning with the ways doctrinal statements focus on theological topics, then moving to the fact that they synthesize biblical teachings, and then to the fact that they explain the teachings of Scripture. We should all realize by now that theology is a vast field of study with countless topics. It's so expansive that it may be compared to the vast stretches of the night sky. The sheer size and complexity of theology often tempts us to deal with it in a haphazard, random manner. Yet, just as astronomers find it helpful to divide the night sky into regions to study it, systematic theologians have found it useful to divide theology into various topics. We've seen in this series that from the medieval period, there has been a strong tendency for systematic theology to divide into 5 or 6 main regions. Bibliology, which focuses on the Bible; theology proper, which gives attention to God Himself; anthropology, a concern with theological perspectives on humanity; soteriology, the topic of salvation; ecclesiology, a focus on the church; and eschatology, the subject of last things. In this lesson, the term doctrine includes a statement or explanation related to any of these very broad topics. But as we know, these and other larger categories of doctrines also divide into smaller and smaller topics. Take, for instance, theology proper. One aspect of theology proper is the doctrine of Christology. It covers both the person and work of Christ, and Christ's person divides into both His human and divine natures. And His human nature includes both His body and His soul, and so on and so on. every major doctrine in systematic theology divides into smaller and smaller topics. Now, for the most part, in this lesson, we'll tend to use the term doctrine to refer to discussions of topics in systematic theology that are fairly substantial in size. But we must remain flexible, knowing that any level of theology, no matter how small, involves some measure of doctrinal discussion. In addition to focusing on theological topics, doctrinal discussions in systematic theology synthesize biblical teachings by relating them to each other.